I love movies, television, stories in general. There's something magical about being transported to an alien planet or whisked back in time, completely captivated by a narrative. Yet, I often find myself just as, if not more, fascinated by the process of how these stories are brought to life, with behind the scenes and making of style content being my personal favourite, offering a unique look into the delicate craft behind a final product. I'm also a sucker for innovation. When you see a new technique or technology used in a creative or interesting way that makes you stop and go, now that's a clever idea. And when I watch the behind the scenes for The Mandalorian, 1899, The Batman, I got that exact feeling. These projects both used and managed to popularise an entirely new and revolutionary filmmaking method. That method is virtual production. Virtual production was a revolutionary advancement to the filmmaking industry, truly changing the way that both visual effects and films are created. However, as time's gone on, virtual production has gone through somewhat of an identity crisis, with audiences perceiving it to be one thing, and even people in industry not being able to agree on an exact definition. So, throughout this video essay, we're going to examine these differences in perception and opinion. First, looking into the industry side, garnering what the industry believes virtual production is. Then we'll delve into what general audiences think virtual production is, investigating some of the reasons that lead them to think this way. We'll then turn to the audience and their opinions, examining the effect that they can and have had on the industry, before concluding with an investigation into virtual production's place in the future of the film industry, with the overarching goal of discovering what virtual production really is. To achieve this, I've scoured forums, watched countless videos, and spoken with some industry professionals from across varying parts of the industry, gaining their insights and opinions on the complex yet simple question: virtual production, what's the deal? First up, we need to investigate what the industry defines virtual production as, which sounds like a lot simpler task than it turns out to be, as depending on who you ask and what their company or personal experience is, you tend to get a slightly different answer. So here's where I reached out to the industry professionals that I mentioned earlier. So let's meet them.
Hey, my name is David Stapp. I am a virtual production stage operator.
So I'm Peter Kirkup. I'm Solutions and Innovation Director at Disguise.
My name's Ross Gilbert, and usually I'm a CG supervisor for film and TV.
My name's Rob Chandler. What do I do? That's a really good question. So I guess you'd probably put me in the bucket of a VP of virtual production supervisor.
Having these professional voices on board, I was able to get a better understanding of how the industry views virtual production as a whole. I did this by asking a series of questions, starting out with how they personally would define virtual production. Right, so how would you define virtual production?
So within my world, virtual production means LED-based content capture for primarily for film and episodic TV. In the world that Disguise exists, because we specialize in kind of getting pixels onto displays, our world is the virtual production that has become more ubiquitous, which is the LED-based virtual production, as The Mandalorian and 1899 and all those kind of relevant case studies have brought out to the marketplace.
Okay, so the way that I define virtual production is where we're bridging the gap between real locations and full live action production, between any sort of completely fictional CGI locations or anything non-real, anything that's completely false but is not quite rendered and composited offline. So it's this sort of mid-ground of like not online, not offline, but like real-time backgrounds. But yeah, that's what I understand it as, is like a dome or a semi-dome, I don't even know if that's a word, but like a quarter sphere of LED screens, and then color calibrated to the camera, and yeah, just basically a fancy way of swapping out the background by getting some foreground interaction also.
How do you define virtual production?
For me, virtual production is defined as just like the melting of two worlds, right? The physical and the virtual world, coming together to create a seamless illusion, right? And this is what we typically refer to as ICV effects, in-camera visual effects. This is what was made popular by The Mandalorian back in 2019. That's kind of the way I see it, is you're just creating this seamless illusion where you're using physical and virtual sets and environments to come together and just kind of trick the eye, fool the audience.
I personally think it is the use of converging technologies to create content, and that when I mean content, I mean that's literally everything from AAA filmmaking, high-end TV, all the way down to YouTube videos, helping people to do their jobs more efficiently, that kind of thing.
As expected, all the answers were along the same lines while remaining broad yet personal to each being slightly different corresponding to their unique experiences. Each did go into greater detail, both in and outside of their own respective experiences.
But the term virtual production has a wider meaning to the industry, meaning any sort of digitally enhanced production technique. So green screen is a virtual production technique, as are full CG shots.
And why I say that is because it's not just about an LED wall or Unreal Engine anymore. It sort of was.
And it's definitely evolved since then, and there are multiple flavors of virtual production now, different ways you can approach it.
Predominantly, I tend to think of it about background replacements for things like reflection casting and light casting generally. I think that's where the strengths lie.
The key notes taken away were that certain points kept coming up between experts, such as the idea that virtual production is a convergence of technology. It blends the physical and virtual, and is about real-time visualization. Our next stop is looking into what the public think virtual production is, which itself is a complex question, and one that truly doesn't have an exact or correct answer, as simply everyone has their own opinion. So now felt like the perfect opportunity to investigate how people in industry think others view virtual production, with a bit more of a focus on people outside of the industry, the audience. So I asked, what do you think the audience's perception of virtual production is? What did they think virtual production is?
It's an interesting question, actually, and I was going to say, it's a niche part of the audience that either would care or has an opinion on it. Most people, when you talk about virtual production, is they go, "Oh, that's the big LED wall, right?"
Okay, so what you would imagine is that some of those people have probably watched something like behind the scenes of Mandalorian or something like that, and they think it's cool and whizzy and fancy and interesting and different, novel. I'd say people generally tend to consider it novel.
It's interesting when you try to talk to people or explain virtual production to just, your general audience out there, people who are not familiar with filmmaking or anything like, behind the scenes of what was done on The Mandalorian and stuff like that. Virtual production is this buzzword these days, but I still think that people can easily just kind of put it in the same space as green screen, or as it's just an effect, right? And there's so much more to it, but I think that the public perception of virtual production is, some people look at it as kind of a gimmick. I think as it's gotten used more and more on certain shows and productions, some people are just looking at it as like, oh, it's just the next new hot piece of technology and it'll phase out and things like that.
So I think if we are doing our jobs right, they're not aware of virtual production. The best outcome for any sort of digital enhancement to a film shoot is that it is not known by the audience because they're focused on the story. And where production distracts from the story and people start to realize how a shot is constructed, or even start to think about how a shot is constructed, it means something's gone wrong in a way. That is a really interesting thing. Is like, we exist in a tech bubble, right? We exist in a world where all of our social networks, all of the people we interact with are highly conscious of the technology that we interact with day in and day out.
So I think that's what the public probably see it as, is this sort of new magic ability to sort of seamlessly transport yourself to somewhere that doesn't exist or can be imagined inside of a computer.
Yeah. So you would say it's kind of more along the lines of what they can see from like the behind the scenes footage.
I don't know that anybody else would really have, okay, so obviously if the visual effects shot is done well, you don't really see it and you don't question it. Therefore, the only time anybody really ought to have known it was ever a thing is when they see it behind the scenes. I don't know that the layman tends to be that well informed on, offline rendered visual effects. Like, I can't even tell what I'm looking at in films these days. So I don't suppose that the layman would either. So it's really only when they get a slice of the behind the scenes that they start to engage with that and question it a bit and realize that these sort of emerging technologies exist.
I think their perception of it is when it becomes newsworthy, maybe. So, the BBC did a big thing at the Tokyo Olympics where they showed the technology off and the green screen. And The Mandalorian still gets referenced because it's the one that they sort of drew back the curtains on. This is how we're making this stuff. I think film people are sort of interested in it. But I think as a general audience, I think as long as it doesn't look, when they're watching it and it's still doing something, it works.
There are a few common themes that seem to pop up throughout all of the answers. One that appeared a few times is the idea that general audiences shouldn't know what virtual production is. While those interested in film may watch behind the scenes footage and learn that way, most of the audience really only care if the final product looks good. These discussions, combined with online research, I've been able to split the public into three pretty vague groups. Group 1, those who have no idea or don't care. These are the sort of people who care far more about the story that they're watching rather than any type of production technique used to bring it to life. Group 2, those who have heard the buzzword, but still don't really care or understand what it is. This group know the term virtual production, but not what it entails, leading them to often misuse it. Such as in this example, they will attribute traditional VFX to virtual production, not understanding that there is actually a difference. Group 3, those who engage and either watch behind the scenes and making of style content, read available articles, or research it themselves. This third group to me is the most interesting. They have that baseline level of understanding, leading them to be the most vocal, especially online. Going back to the same example from before, they're the type to inform when Group 2 misuse the term virtual production. Group 3 is perhaps the most relevant to this discussion, as they are simply the ones who actually care, and are certainly the most vocal. So, what do they think VP is? Well, as mentioned, this group will get their information from behind the scenes content and self-research. So by watching and researching virtual production ourselves, we can see how it's presented. Shows like Disney's Gallery, a show which delved into the production of the Mandalorian TV show, is perhaps the most famous example, and it describes virtual production as, quote, a system whereby we can have game engine real-time renders and video well technology coming together to create a backdrop. This was the first instance of any behind the scenes showing virtual production, and overall it does a very, very good job at taking the viewer through the story of how the volume technology is created, covering near enough all aspects of virtual production throughout. But as the volume was the new, fancy tech, that was the main focus. This focus, unfortunately, started a trend for following projects behind the scenes to show off virtual production, when it was more showing off the volume and in-camera VFX. Projects like The Book of Boba Fett, Obi-Wan, Thor Love and Thunder, The Batman, Percy Jackson and the Olympians, Doctor Who, Avatar The Last Airbender, House of the Dragon, Barbie, all follow the same format, showing off the same IC VFX workflow, labelled as virtual production. Nowhere do they discuss that this is just one type. Even through simple Google searches, we can see that more than 90% of results are solely focused on IC VFX and LED volumes. This gives us a very clear view of what audiences are naturally going to expect when they hear the term virtual production. A big LED wall soundstage with no green screen in sight, overlooking the track camera and the impressive network built for these systems to work in unison. With these groups defined, I was also curious to see how the industry thinks the public view the use of virtual production. So next up, I asked, do you think the audience view virtual production favourably?
I really think it's kind of right in the middle. It's in that neutral gray zone, in my opinion, because there have been great use cases, and I think there's been some not so great use cases. But it is interesting. It all comes down to like, how aware are people of this technology in the first place, you know?
Yeah, in theory, potentially, I can't see why not. It's just another tool in the toolbox, one would hope, and it shouldn't be hated on indiscriminately. There should be no reason to dislike it, and in theory, right, it is what it is. Every tool, in theory, has its purpose. Maybe it's something that, it's like anyone that buys new tools, you want to play with your new tool, but it might not be appropriate all the time, even though you're inclined to want to use it. So I can't see why they wouldn't see it favorably. People ought not to care how the thing was made.
I think they don't care, actually, until they care. Right? They don't know that a particular software package has been used to do the VFX on a particular film, do they? So why would they really care about whether or not it's been filmed on an LED wall, green screen, or wherever?
I think that your general audience looks at it, I don't want to say it's unfavorable. I think it's, overall, I think they're accepting of it. I think when people saw what it was doing, with Mandalorian, I don't think it really took anybody out of the experience. I think it was very immersive for a lot of people. But then you started to see like publicity coming out about how they shot The Mandalorian. Then other shows started to come along on Disney Plus and Apple TV and all those things using the same technology. And there have been some productions where it wasn't used in the best way. It wasn't used in a way that was, the best use case, or it didn't look the best, right? And it actually had some flaws. And so people kind of took a negative approach to it at that point. They're like, oh, this was not good in this scenario. This production, it looked really bad. So obviously this is not a good tool. And it's pretty easy for one production to kind of, spoil it for some people. That even happens on the client side. You could have one bad experience with virtual production, and you may not want to deal with it ever again. I've seen that happen countless times.
These answers honestly stirred up more questions for me. The hesitance and lack of confidence to proclaim that, yes, audiences like virtual production was very interesting to me. But when you search online on places like X or forums like Reddit, it becomes immediately obvious why these are the answers that we got, which leads us perfectly into section 3. Now that we have a clearer picture on roughly what both the audience thinks virtual production is and what the industry says virtual production is, we can investigate deeper how audiences have reacted to virtual production within filmmaking. The easiest way to do this is to look at the internet, specifically forums and social media, really anywhere where people share their thoughts. By searching things like virtual production, volume, LED wall, or even film titles that were advertised as using virtual production, I was able to find a lot. And I mean a lot. All of this is really just scratching the surface. Simply put, there's way too many varying opinions on many different aspects of virtual production that each person takes issue with. So, rather than question the things that they're saying, I decided to focus more on the impact that these sort of comments and opinions have on the industry as a whole. I started by focusing on the impact these comments have on the people in the industry. So, I asked, when you hear or read comments from the public like these, how do they make you feel?
That we're not doing a job good enough.
I have made all kinds of comments about all kinds of things because that's good. We should be able to discuss these things freely and have sort of opinions that aren't always complimentary. So whether somebody likes or dislikes something, I'm not particularly fussed about. I can tell you that having worked on virtual productions, there are times when it works seamlessly and you don't need to do anything, and in that moment you love it. And there are other shots in the same sequence that just don't work, and they run up against sort of some of the physical limitations of virtual productions, like interactive light, mismatches, seams. strobing. There's all kinds of artifacts and things that you suffer from on virtual production that makes you tend to want to dislike it.
So when I read comments like that, I mean, I've had those moments where I've thought some of those same comments, when I've seen certain use cases. And again, there is no uniform method to virtual production. There is no standard. Everyone's approaching it in a different way, and they're trying new things, and sometimes it pays off big time. Other times it does not, and sometimes they experimented and it just did not look so great, and it started to, again, be a sore spot for that production where people are like, oh, that doesn't look good. That just looks fake. Why didn't they just go on location and shoot it this way? And again, going back to the education side, not everyone, in the general public is going to know all of these factors that go into the decision to use virtual production. It's not always just it's the new hot technology, let's use that. I'm the first one to tell people when not to use virtual production.
Sometimes I feel like those comments mean that potentially the productions haven't quite nailed what they were trying to nail. And then I start questioning why. I look at a shot or I look at a scene and I'm like, well, where did this go wrong? Is it something that the technology let the shot down? Was it a creative choice to put that in there? That gives us a really interesting situation where that stance of wanting to not have the technique known or the technique shouldn't be prevalent to the success of the show. Actually, in certain situations, it has become a reason that people are interested in it. Like, Mandalorian, the second, third series, I'm sure got more viewerships because people were like, oh, let me watch this.
I do feel it's important to note that Peter made a very, very valid point, that it's rare to go onto these type of websites or forums and see people expressing positive opinions in general, let alone on something as specific as their thoughts on virtual production.
The comments that you see, generally, they tend to verge on the negative side, but you always have to take that with a pinch of salt of like, nobody really goes on forums to talk about how great something looks. Like, people tend to always write in the negative. That's the reason they're evoking emotions.
I do also feel it's even more important to mention that everyone is more than entitled to their own opinions. What looked good to one user may have ruined the entire experience for another, and I'm certainly not trying to take anything away from those feelings. So, now that we understand these comments and feelings exist, we can research how the filmmaking industry has reacted. Most productions have carried on as they were. These sort of comments are not new to the filmmaking industry, and production companies were not going to simply cease production after a collection of online comments. There have been, however, some productions that in recent years have been following a slightly worrying trend.
On top of the kind of the stunts and the driving, and because all of that stuff is in camera, none of that is CGI. The CGI is like the crowd.
No CGI here. The John Wick dogs are totally real.
What we're looking at here is not CGI.
No, it's all real. I think you feel when it's fake. When it's you it's somehow artificial. All of this is real.
The reason why we built everything is because built everything as opposed to doing a lot of CGI.
I mean, listen, I love CGI, but we're not using CGI in this one. It's puppets, man, puppets. It's all puppets.
Top Gun Maverick was marketed as practical, having their actors up in jets, doing it for real.
I'm saying right now, no CGI in the jets.
And everything you see in this film, obviously, it's for real.
It's very important to me that it be practical.
And well, yes, this is true. They did send actors up in jets and photographed real aircraft. For significant portions of filming, they flew these greyed out jets covered in tracking markers that would be digitally replaced later. Things like the jet, the interior, the canopy, the exterior of the jet, other visible jets, jets in formation and wide shots. In some shots, it's even a mix of real jet and fake jets. For example, the 5th generation fighters and the F-14s towards the end of the film are all completely CGI, with the 5th gen fighters not existing and the F-14s being retired. The Dark Star was a model that couldn't fly, so whenever that's flying, in a wide shot, that's CGI too. Yet, nowhere in the marketing or behind the scenes content or the more than 400 VFX artists who worked on the project even mentioned. Fortunately, the practical film would end up being nominated for an Academy Award in visual effects. Seemingly this all stemmed from an old 2015 interview with Tom Cruise, back when a second Top Gun film was barely even in the works. He said this.
A possibility of a Top Gun 2? Am I hearing that? Is this
asking
happening?
this, but we got to do all the jets practical. No CGI in the jets. I'm saying right now, no CGI in the jets.
Pretty quickly after, social media, along with news and other media outlets, began reporting that Top Gun 2 would be filmed all practically. Jonas Using has a phenomenal video series on his YouTube channel, The Movie Rabbit Hole, called No CGI is Really Just Invisible CGI, that delves much deeper into this issue relating to CGI and VFX. So why did I mention this movie specifically? CGI jets and virtual production are quite different after all. Well, through some research, I learned that LA-based Lux Machina hung two 125 by 24 foot curved projector screens around the perimeter of the set. They used 15 projectors to project 270 degrees of content for use as a virtual background during the classroom scenes, along with a rear projection screen in front of the Dark Star's canopy for the close-ups during its flight scenes.
It's very important to me that it be practical.
Top Gun was simply the first in the chain that would market like this in relation to virtual production. The Barbie film would unfortunately follow in Top Gun's footsteps, being caught in the same trap of, we filmed it practically, despite making use of an in-camera VFX workflow and other virtual production methods. Ultimately, the marketing lent further into this practically filmed lane, even going so far as to try to hide blue screen and VFX and some of the behind-the-scenes content.
There's a 45-minute behind-the-scenes featurette of the Barbie film, and in it, they are keying out all of the blue screen and replacing it with what appears to be practical set pieces to avoid the stigma of having visual effects in your film.
Well, I don't personally believe that this method of marketing is the way forward for virtual production. It's worth potentially investigating the effect that priming your audience to think that your piece was filmed practically could have. Another interesting question on this topic is, who's ultimately responsible for this marketing strategy? Does it stem from a simple misunderstanding between the public and production, as it appears to be the inciting incidents with both Top Gun and Barbie? Is it production's responsibility to clarify how the project was being filmed, or does it really not matter? I wanted to gauge the industry professionals' opinions on this marketing option, so very simply, I asked them, should audiences be primed to believe that projects are filmed practically and not with heavy involvement from virtual production or VFX?
No, of course not. Absolutely not.
It's a marketing ploy, right?
I don't think that there is that much value in saying things were done for real if they were not done for real, if they look like they were, right?
In my opinion, it is very devious to try and convince people that there were no effects done, there was no kind of post, done to something, that everything was just done in camera, it was magical, and you just threw some clips together and poof, you got a production, you got a movie, you got a TV show. I don't know why that's a thing these days.
Yeah, so I mean, that seems to have been a bit of a trend this year, right? Of the, no VFX comments or no CGI comments ending up in press releases and things like that. I think that is potentially doing the industry a bit of a disservice. No visible CGI is what they really mean in those situations, and you've seen the kind of backlash of articles from industry press after those sort of comments.
I then added a follow-up question of, is this form of advertising fair on the virtual production and VFX teams who worked on the film? Which was met by pretty unanimous no.
No, I think, there's a lot of people who put their blood, sweat and tears and career into making these shots look good and look successful, and comments that say there's no VFX don't do those people much of a service when it comes to career development. If they then put on their CV that they worked on that production, that they will ubiquitously have to explain yes, there was VFX in that shot and I did it, and so on.
I don't understand who that's benefiting or what, that's getting them, like in terms of publicity, because we all know about effects. We all know about visual effects and how it's used these days. It's nothing new. And so I don't know if they're trying to avoid some kind of taboo thing. It's odd to me. But in my opinion, being on this side of it, I feel like we should be giving credit. We should be highlighting the hard work of these people who are creating these illusions.
Our penultimate section is all about examining where virtual production currently is and where it's going in the industry. First off, we need to discern where virtual production lies in the filmmaking industry currently, investigating its key uses. To do this, I asked multiple questions, such as, how can filmmakers decide to use virtual production? In what ways are they able to determine using ICVFX, green screens, or location filming? And is virtual production cost effective?
Using an LED volume to produce your shots that would otherwise be either location shots or post-produced VFX shots potentially is a huge cost saving, because it's a single location instead of traveling people around. It's, you can do golden hour for all day if you want to, all those sort of wins. However, the asset production cost can counterbalance that. And, we've seen a real kind of response from the industry to move away from those big, massive Unreal Engine only setups because of that sort of asset production costs. Ultimately, if you can't achieve photorealism in your game engine, it's not going to be good enough for a virtual production backdrop unless it's a highly stylized production. And photorealism, yes, it's easier now with Lumen and Nanite and all these kind of technology advances in the engines, but it is still a costly thing to achieve real photorealism.
Virtual production is cost effective in certain scenarios, right? It is not the magic bullet. And this is, again, what I constantly am telling people on phone calls. If you came to me and said, hey, I need to shoot one scene for my movie in a coffee shop, and we're thinking about doing that in virtual production. Well, if you're looking at just one day, like a simple talking scene in a coffee shop, like literally just one shoot day, I'd probably tell you just go to a coffee shop, because it's probably going to be cheaper.
Unless, which often happens, is that CGI gets invoked anyway to replace the green screen, the volume, which I've had to do a number of times. So in those cases, no, it absolutely isn't. If it was incorrectly used, you will end up replacing it anyway. So it's like double expensive at that point. Whereas if it's a simple shot, I'd say it's probably, in my opinion, it seems to be better for like commercials and high-end TV, where you're the limit of kind of perfection and like total immersion is like negligible. I think it's good at that point, around that sort of level, and also knowing when to just turn the volume to a green screen and just let it be green, because there's going to be flashbangs going off, or there's going to be like sand kicked up in front of the screen, and that comes with the experience that we spoke about earlier. So it's cost effective when used correctly at the correct degree of production.
If you're like, yeah, we need to get these quick dialogue shots in different locations, you're like, oh, we need to be in Tokyo, oh, now we need to be over here in Australia, and it's like, yeah, you can do that. It's like, as long as you prepare, right? Pre-production is so important in that aspect. You could totally pull it off. It's just, you have to have the right people in place to be able to create those environments, get them optimized, get them ready for the shoot day. And this is where virtual production supervisors, play such a crucial role. They're the one kind of driving that team to make sure we know what the plan is and how to execute that plan within that time frame. So yeah, it's very important to really know where it doesn't make sense, for virtual production to be used. And I think that's one of those things where it's like, oh, if you're just doing one location, that's for a really small scene, that's a very easily attainable location, you should probably just go shoot it on site. But, oh, if you need a coffee shop on the moon, well, yeah, obviously that's where we're kind of getting into that more creative territory. So it really sometimes comes down to budget. That's at the end of the day, because you have to factor in a lot of different things for virtual production. Everything from the environment creation, your 3D people, you're on your virtual art department, up to like the VP supervisors, your stage operators who are going to be on set to actually help manage and maintain the wall, the LED wall, or the green screen studio. So That's where working with people who are experienced and know how those productions work and how, to efficiently manage time and people can play such a critical role. It's really who you surround yourself with. You want to find people who are experts in that field and people who will just be honest with you, because I'm tired of people just saying, yeah, you can use it for anything, because you can't. You shouldn't. And I think that applies to anything when it comes to any kind of visual effects. Green screen is not an answer for everything. Rear projection is not an answer for everything. So that's when you have a real understanding and a mastery of your craft, is when you can comfortably tell people what it can and cannot do.
There's a couple of sort of trains of thought around that. One of them is whether or not the script has been written with particular ways of doing things in mind. And bottom line, it's all about money as well, and the understanding of being able to do a $60 million film for $30 million using this tech. It will fundamentally be driven by that, in my opinion, right? As it goes through the process, as it gets better, as you can do this, conversations go. I think I overheard one again anecdotally about talking about using virtual production, and someone put their hand up and they said, so what you're saying is that I didn't need to fly my second unit around the world to get these shots for 6 months at a cost of this. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you didn't need to do that.
When you've got virtual production studios that cost tens of thousands of dollars a day, and that's not even including crew, that's just the facility, it's not usually going to make a lot of sense. Now, if you're looking to knock out multiple locations, like we need to knock out a coffee shop, a warehouse, a library, and 2 other scenes all in the same day, well, yeah, that's exactly what virtual production is made for, because then you're maximizing that day rate that you're going to have to pay for virtual production, right? So it all comes down to what the need of the production is, what are they looking to achieve, because the efficiency that you get with virtual production for certain scenarios is pretty amazing. I have seen people achieve 8 to 10 locations in one day, which is just not possible. If anyone's ever worked on a real film set, you just know how much is involved in traveling to a location, setting up, getting all of your talent, all your grip, all your camera department, everybody, hair and makeup. It's a lot. And by the time you're actually rolling and you get everything set and you have to break down and go to the next location, you're lucky to get 2 locations in a day, maybe 3 if they're really close and in really small portions you have to capture. But getting beyond 3 locations in one day is just, it's impossible unless you're just literally working 20-hour days, and no one wants to do that, right?
Each had some very interesting points to explain where virtual production currently sits in the industry, highlighting some of the strengths and benefits to making use of virtual production. Interestingly, both Peter and Ross made mention of Gartner hype cycles and how they believe that virtual production is currently in the middle of one, with Peter using the cycle to explain how virtual production got to where it is.
So I think virtual production has been on a hype cycle, and I don't know if you've seen Gartner's hype cycle curve before, but virtual production is absolutely on that hype cycle. It starts with the technology trigger, the LED screens and the rendering, and the fidelity has all led us to a point where it's possible to do virtual production. Then there's the hype moment where Mandalorian, 1899, Barbie, all these things have happened off the back of House of Dragons is another one, off the back of the hype of virtual production, as in they are almost gaining momentum and gaining reputation in our industry because of the production techniques that are utilized, and that has led to a lot of interest and a lot of conversations. I still almost every single day have a conversation about Mandalorian, which is bonkers. It's it's a 5-year-old case study now. But actually the interesting bit of that is that the industry has now gone on this cycle. So now we've seen this kind of dip in virtual production, which arguably was caused by the writers' strike as much as it was by the actual virtual production technique itself being potentially challenging. And we're starting to see a rise out of that hype cycle into, they call it the plateau of productivity, where you actually are able to sort of generate real money and make your virtual production studio make sense, and so on.
With all this information, we can ascertain that virtual production is close to the stage where it will be used in some way on almost every project. With this understanding, we can progress onto the future of virtual production, finally asking, what is the future of virtual production?
I think the future of virtual production really is just efficiency.
So I feel like the future of virtual production probably is more for like the world of like projection art and immersive installation art and things like that. I think that's where it's already happening, opening up quite a lot with interesting interactive stuff.
So I think there's that side of things, which is, well, it'll just what the future of VP is. It's a production choice. That's all it is. It's why use Windows or Google Docs? It'll be, should we do it this way? Let's get Roger in. We'll talk to him about it. It will get easier, with technology. Great analogy. Sorry, another one. Moore's law. It'll get cheaper. It'll get easier to use, and it will get faster.
For being able to pre-visualize your offline CG that's coming later, yes, like that is where it shines, is being able to help the directors to, as I said, it's kind of a bridging thing for me. It's not on location, it's not full CG, it's somewhere in between. And if it can even just be used to get directors or DPs to sort of see the missing ingredients, like a green screen is not that good to look at on set. Realistically, I was on set yesterday and people just don't get it. We're doing something simple with a background and a foreground, and we're trying to explain. I had to literally go to a printer and print out the foreground, and I put sellotape so it was transparent where it's and put it over the monitor so they could visualize it. If I'd have had some sort of fancy virtual production thing going on there, this was really small budget, so it never would have happened, but you would have been able to get that. It kind of just like answers the questions for the people that are not quite seeing it, or it just generally explains a picture to a whole group of people.
I think NERF is a really, really interesting technique. There was a research paper came out yesterday from NVIDIA of ray tracing in NERFs, which is another world of exploration now of like, well, what does that mean for our industry? If you can do mixes of NERF and some CG elements that you're adding in, if you're trying to do War of the Worlds and you want the robots coming along, you can't capture that in the NERF because they don't exist, but you could do that with a game engine. So maybe a way to layer those two together and bring, composite scenes into the virtual production environment. I think there's just tremendous kind of room to grow up in that space, which is so exciting for everything we do as an industry.
As adoption goes up, we're going to start to be able to see and hear more voices of different pain points or different areas where like, oh, this could be better. Maybe we have a solution, or maybe we can help create a voice to bring a solution about. And I think that's why it's so important to collaborate in the virtual community space. That's something I'm huge about. Like, we have so many people out there that are trying to do it themselves. They're trying to hide all the secrets behind the door, right? And like, I want to be the first one to do this. And I think that's a bad way to do it. I think we should all be sharing secrets. I think we should all come together to make it better, make it better and easier for people 3, 4, 5 years from now, right? Make it easier for people who are in high school and college to know about this technology, how it works, and how to get into it. Because think about all the kids who are wanting to get into the film industry. How many of them even know about this and even know where to go to get into this, right? So I think
I also think for virtual production, what's become really obvious is that the ginormous volumes that were being built in the kind of hype aren't necessarily the right production technique. Sometimes you just need a small bit of LED, sometimes you need LED curved around a train or a car or a bus or whatever. So having an agile volume that can reformat itself to match the shot that you're trying to achieve is really key as well. You know, it doesn't necessarily, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, basically.
With these explanations, we can see that there's no one clear roadmap for where virtual production is going, and honestly, again, there's no correct answer here. I agree with Rob's view that becoming more integrated with normal production. I think David's idea regarding the education side and the sharing of knowledge is also accurate. He also mentioned the advancement of technology and how this will allow for improvements to shooting and lowering the cost of entry, all pushing the industry forward. I think Ross's view of live event projection, accessibility, and the build-up of general understanding of virtual production is also accurate. And finally, the technological advancements that Peter mentions, along with the progression to virtual production becoming more specialist for specific types of shots like pickups and driving plays, is also something that I agree with. So, with all that said, how can we help people to recognise what defines virtual production? What are the differences between normal production and a virtual production? Through research and personal experience, I've concluded that virtual production is ultimately a broad term, but at its core, it's two things. First and foremost, it's a convergence of technology, specifically technologies that, when combined, offer a real-time, computer-aided visualization method for filmmaking. Secondly, and perhaps unintentionally, it's a workflow designed to aid both production and post-production heavily by intensifying the pre-production. You can see by these diagrams that when compared to a traditional filmmaking workflow, a virtual production workflow is significantly more complex, collaborative, and iterative. It erodes the boundaries between production phases and production teams, allowing for a more cohesive production where all members can make use of the visualization tools that are on offer. So, what are these converging visualization technologies that keep being referred to? Seemingly, from my research, there are three broad types that exist on a sort of gradient, with each sharing aspects from other types, and there being really few hard boundaries between. Type A, virtual capture. Possibly the least publicly known type, virtual capture encompasses a few technologies, but as a broad description, it's a real-time render of a simulated thing, and that thing can change. For example, it could be a virtual camera rig, as demonstrated here in the behind the scenes for The Lion King. The same technology can be used for virtual location scouting, virtual light reference, and even as an on-set visualization tool, acting as a sort of window into the CG world, aiding actors, camera operators, and the like. This type makes use of real-time rendering, typically done with a game engine, and 3D tracking. Type B, live composite. Next up is perhaps the most misunderstood type. Live composite involves a real thing, typically in front of a green screen, alongside a real-time composited virtual component. The most common version of this type is an actor in front of a green screen, alongside a real-time live composite, sometimes with a 3D track camera, with the real-time live composite being the key factor that separates this from traditional offline green screening. This type also has wider uses than just filmmaking, with things like the news and weather reports, and virtual studios used for presenting. Type B also extends as far as recording a physical actor's body and or face movements, typically done with a motion capture suit, along with a way to simultaneously view the capture in real time. This specific technique is what's known as simulcam, created all the way back in 2009 for James Cameron's Avatar film. You can see in these examples someone wearing a mocap suit hooked up to a game engine, allowing for a live visualization preview of what the final data will look like. Again, this live visualization is the key factor between a normal and a virtual production. The technologies involved in Type B are live chroma keying, again real-time rendering, and 3D tracking for both cameras and performance. Type C, in-camera visual effects. By this point, we're no strangers to ICVFX. It involves a real thing, like an actor, in front of some sort of display, such as a projector or high-def TV, but most commonly an LED wall, with real-time rendered content projected across, a track camera moving through 3D space, potentially altering the content to match what would happen in the real world. It follows the same principles as Type B green screen live compositing, but with a few notable improvements, such as expanding costume and set decoration freedom, opening up costumes to greens and blues, and saving compositing artists from challenging see-through materials, like this plastic here. But perhaps more importantly, this type is able to accurately capture both lighting and reflections from the virtual environments. For example, take my guitar. It's got a very glossy and reflective surface, so if we're filming a story that required an actor to hold this, using live compositing or traditional green screen workflow, it would simply be a nightmare to try to key. But with an ICVFX workflow, this problem's been completely skipped, and honestly becomes a major strength in blending the physical and virtual. Perhaps a better example of this, as shown in practice, is how heavy Disney dared to lean into this concept with The Mandalorian, giving the title character a near complete chrome costume, highlighting this major advantage of ICVFX. So the technologies involved here are the display, and once again a real-time render engine, and 3D tracking, with the whole idea of this type being that everything is able to be captured in camera, hence the name. Throughout this video essay, we've examined the difference between audience and industry perception of what virtual production is, discovering the reasons for these differences, and concluding that there are 3 broad opinion types that audience members can fall into. We explored the third type, those who care, in more depth, recognising that virtual production is generally marketed as in-camera VFX, so that's what most people assume it to be. Then we turned our attention to the industry, conducting interviews with industry professionals to gain insights and understand their opinions on virtual production from inside the industry. We discovered that the industry has wider views of virtual production, extending to broad terms like convergence of technology, live composite green screening, and visualization methods. We then examined if the industry is aware of how the general audience views virtual production, and how the industry has reacted and changed to these views. Then we have investigated where virtual production currently sits in a filmmaking pipeline, and speculated to where it's heading, looking towards the future of the technology, its uses, and its longevity. Most importantly, we've given our own definition to virtual production, breaking it down to its most basic components, and exiting with the explanation of the 3 types that we've just heard. So, what is the deal with virtual production? Throughout the entire process, we've learned that ultimately virtual production is a tool. It's available to all filmmakers of all levels, designed to aid production and production teams with visualization and realization of successfully blending the physical and virtual worlds. It's always worth remembering that when used well, virtual production should go entirely unnoticed by an audience, the story and the quality of the visuals being paramount to creating that successful illusion. In short, people may think they know what they're looking at, but when executed well, you might just be able to fill them.